of the Finance Committee. So I'm calling the Finance Committee to order at 2:03 p.m. on April 2nd, 24. This is a virtual meeting. It will only be held via Zoom, and there's no in-person public access at this meeting. Members of the public may attend via Zoom or by phoning in. If you have a question you wish to make public comment, rather, please raise your hand during the public comment period, and I will call on you in sequence. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start. That we had a discussion at the end of last meeting about timing of when we would be reviewing various pieces and we did get the school budget last night, as you know. So we are going to start today. We're going to do a little bit of just have some questions, just initial review of the school budget. Our next meeting on April 16th, we will go into the school budget in depth, and we will have the public hearing on April 25th in the evening. If it's okay with the committee, I would like to invite the council as well in general, so that we have all the counselors who wish to attend in the audience. Is that all right with everybody? Okay. And then finally, we'll make a recommendation on May 3rd, which I think we have a scheduled meeting in the morning that Friday.
Pardon me, are you talking about the regional school budget?
Yes.
So I think what we had discussed was for the committee to continue a meeting after the hearing to deliberate, so that the council could potentially vote on Monday, the 29th.
Okay. All right. That's not what I had in my notes, but
sorry if I didn't update our
that's
planning.
Okay. There's been a lot of things going on.
Could you just give me those dates again?
So today we're going to begin the budget review. 2 weeks from today, April 16th, we're going to have an in-depth review of the school budget. And then on April 25th, which is a Thursday evening at 6:30, we'll have a public hearing, and we will then
I have discussion and vote recommendation on the 25th, and then also on the 3rd. I see. I had duplicated that. It should be the discussion and vote recommendation on the 25th.
Okay.
And then
right,
so that the council could potentially act on Monday, April 29th.
Okay.
So heads up, everyone, there will be a very short turnaround for your report that week.
Okay, so anyway, all right, and then so we should be finished up that on the 25th in terms of the committee recommendations.
Question about the 25th.
Yes.
Is that going to be Zoom only, or have we considered doing a hybrid model where people can come in person and we meet in a room, like the town room, for in-person testimony?
I have planned on only Zoom, but I'm open to everyone's suggestion, assuming we can get the town room that night. I don't know.
And are we talking about 6:30?
Yes.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Kathy, when is JCPC supposed to be wrapped up? Is it that night?
Well, in theory, in theory, it's next week. But we were thinking, and I can't meet on the 18th. So if we're not finished by the 11th, we'd have to wrap it up on the 25th. I mean, we're at the point. It's a good question, Sarah. You know, I talked to Theta. We might have to add a meeting to get to a point where there's a report. We'll see how far we get tomorrow on Thursday, this Thursday.
Thank you.
There's also the budget coordinating group meeting on Friday.
That's this Friday. and 4 towns on the 20th, Saturday.
Right.
Bob, if I may speak to Mandy's question about holding the in-person meeting
Yep, sure.
for the hearing, before the committee moves forward with definitely doing that as a hybrid meeting, I would need to check if there's other staff members who are able to staff that, because I can't that night.
Okay.
So please don't advertise that
No.
we're going to do that yet.
I was planning on just having a Zoom meeting, but
It was just a question for consideration because there were some audience members that thought it might be useful to be able to show up somewhere and speak in person.
That's fine. As I said, I'm open to that. I just want to make sure that we've got coverage. Okay, Alicia is not here. Anyway, let me go around the room and make sure people can hear me and I can hear them. Andy?
I'm here.
Councilor Haneke?
Present.
Kathy?
Here.
And I'm here, so we do have all of us, and when Alicia joins us, we'll bring her in. Let's see if we have. Okay, I'd like to open up to public comment now. I see there are some people in the audience. If anyone is interested in providing a public comment, please raise your hand now, and we'll bring you in and hear what you have to say.
Would you like to provide a time limit, Bob?
Yeah, there's only 5 people in the audience, so we can do 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I think Allegra Clark is the first person. Mrs. Clark, Miss Clark, please provide your name and tell us where you live.
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, my name is Allegra. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I am a resident of District 2, and I am Zooming in today in support of the regional school budget that was presented at last night's town council meeting. I think that it includes position restorations that would help support our students, and I would like for the town to work with the other towns to find the funds to provide those supports for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I don't see any other hands up. Does anyone else wish to make a public comment at this time? Okay. I think, well, I think we'll just close public comment then. So let's move on to the next, which is the review of the audit. Holly, did you want to provide any information? See, you're present.
Hello, sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
problem.
so no, I mean, I think the audit speaks for itself. We had a clean audit. We had no findings. There was no management letter. The numbers are what the numbers are. I think that at this point, what we used to do in the past is we would set up a meeting time with the actual lead auditor on our team to come in and do a presentation and a discussion. So I think that we could try to schedule that probably for your next finance committee meeting. My understanding now is instead of having an actual audit committee, which is a separate committee, that the finance committee is now the audit committee. So I think that what I would likely suggest is that, I mean, I did not get it until very, very late in the day on Friday. So I apologize for which was our pretty much our last day to get the audit. So I'm sure that folks have not had a lot of time to go through it. So my suggestion would be that we schedule the actual lead auditor to come in during the next finance committee meeting, if we could fit that in the agenda, and have them do a presentation and go over, the most pertinent numbers or important numbers, and that folks have the time to, review it and gather their questions, and then we can have a more in-depth discussion at the next meeting would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. The only question I did have a chance to read through things. The only question I had, and pardon my my ignorance of accounting practices, but it says that we converted to a modified accrual basis during the calendar year of June 30th, and I didn't know what a modified accrual basis and accrual basis of accounting is. So I don't know if you can answer that, but
well, I would likely have the auditors explain that a little
Yeah.
bit better, but
That's
so we operate on a cash basis, but the way that the auditing standards is they convert it to an accrual basis. So they do some adjustments to the financial statements, basically for any revenues that came in during the, say that I believe it's the first 60 days of the following fiscal year. Those were likely bills that went out in the prior fiscal year. So they do some adjustments on their books to get to an accrual basis. It's not something that we do on our books for the state reporting, but it is something that the auditors do to adjust it to be more of a business type practice, where if you sent all these bills out, they should have been collected, and they do some accruals. But they can certainly explain that. It is something that typically happens every year. So at the end of the fiscal year, they will make some what they call audit adjustments. And I'm assuming it's just referring to that.
okay, thanks. My wife had a business and it was on an accrual basis, but it was just simply a cash basis. Andy,
Right.
question? Comment?
Yeah, I mean, I encourage us to have a meeting actually with the lead auditor for a couple of reasons. One is that the appearance, the format and presentation seemed a little different this year than it has in the past. It actually maybe to the benefit, because it had a little bit more just written language that was readable, understandable, as opposed to just pure numbers. But the other thing that was helpful in prior presentations is that the person who was making the presentation, who we asked that they switch so that we could get some freshness, but she would go through and point out with presentation that she prepared in advance what are the key numbers to look at and why they're the critical numbers, and what this and why in every case they were good information, and said good things about how our town is being administered financially. So I found that the presentation was very helpful. Also, since we have one new member of the committee, might be helpful, to do it for that reason too. So I would encourage it.
I think that's a great idea. So if we can invite them, that would be great. Anything else on the audit?
You're muted, Holly. You said something, but
Sorry.
Yeah. So if you, Athena, and or Bob, is the next finance committee going to be 2 weeks from today?
Yes, it's the 16th.
Okay, so I will see if they're available for that date, and if if you have time in your agenda to do that presentation, I can certainly try to schedule that for us.
Yeah, we should try to do it early, because I think we're going to review the regional school budget, so that'll probably take a while. So.
And just to respond to Andy as well, his comments is So it is the same auditing firm, what used to be Melanson. They were, bought out or merged with Markham. So there was a slightly different format, some slightly different procedures and just a minimal changes in the way that some of the data was collected and presented. So those changes are due to their new name. They are now part of Markham, and they did make some changes to their standard formats and procedures.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions about the audit? Okay. Move on. The regional school budget review. We got a presentation last night from Doug and Sarah Bess, and I know that we had a discussion at our last meeting about we should deal with this sooner rather than later. So we're dealing with this sooner rather than later. So I do want to just state something. This is just my personal thoughts on this. And that is, I believe we all share the common goal to provide a strong education for every child in Amherst. Our challenge is that the fundamental landscape of education has changed in recent years. We now face challenges such as reduced state aid, the growth of charter schools, the growing special education population, the decreasing student population, and as we learned last night, aging infrastructure. Technology also brings significant changes in the way children learn and how we prepare them for the future. Additional funding by itself, I do not think, will fully address these concerns. Rather, we need to think about how we structure our educational system so we can achieve the common goal within limited school budgets. We won't achieve this today, but we owe it to the children to find a sustainable solution. So I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself on that, but I do feel very strongly that we want to support public education. My kids went through the public schools in Amherst. They got a great education. They were well prepared for college. And I want to make sure we maintain that. On the other hand, we've got a very different situation than when my kids were in school. So we have to adapt to that as well. I don't know, does anyone else have any questions, comments about the school budget? Andy?
Yeah, I guess I do, and see Mandy's hand is up too. Mandy, if you want to go first. I think that your observations are absolutely correct, and that we value education in Amherst. But when you look at the audit, you look at the percentage of our funds that go into education, we're not different from most other municipalities. It is by far the largest expense. And I think that it's the largest expense because of decisions that have been made that were absolutely correct over a number of years. The question that we have to grapple with in part is that, what are our limits, and how do we deal with the limits? Because if we get it, are we at a point where it will the continued increase in the school budget, which is running at a rate that is greater than our revenue is growing, is in danger now of eating away at other expenditures. Somebody in the audience last night during public comment made, the suggestion that we look at the police department. Well, I think that those of us who've had experienced the police department know that we're at a minimum staffing level now to be able to provide response on a 24/7 basis. And if we shrink the force greater, that we won't be in a position to provide response on a 24/7 basis. And that's, it's hard when you look at the rest of the budget to figure out where there is give to take away. So I think that one of the things that we really need to do is have this discussion. And if we're going to have a more intense discussion at our next meeting, that's when we might want to have Sandy join us and talk about that and sort of say, if you were going to make a decision, or if you were forced to make a decision to increase our funding for the education programs, what are the options that he sees from his perspective as someone with extraordinary experience and financial expertise? I'd ask Holly the same question, but I would not. I think that that's one to flag for 2 weeks from now when we have our more intensive discussion. The other thing that concerns me is that it seems possible, and I almost go to the extent of saying it seems highly likely that we would be in a position a year from now, if we have taken the money from a one-time source like reserves, where we can't do that every year. If we were to make that choice, then a year from now, we're going to be in the same position with them making the same decisions. And if we're going to have to make those decisions, what is to gain by postponing it for a year if we're going to be in the same place a year from now? And I think that that's a discussion that I really hope that Sarah and Sarah Best take back to the school committee as a whole and the administration, and bring that back for us to talk about when we have our more extended presentation at our next meeting, or discussion at our next meeting. So those are my 2 initial comments.
Councilor Haneke?
I second everything that Andy just said, but I kind of want to go a little bit farther with it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mandy. Before you do, can we please just confirm that Alicia
Sure.
can hear us? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Athena. Sorry, Mandy.
Thank
No
you.
problem. I was still thinking in my head before I really got started. It seems clear from last night that the school committee, with this budget proposal that is $700,000 above our financial guidelines and $900,000 above what the 4 towns had sort of given the school committee as guidelines, is intended to be a permanent add to the budget, if you want to call it an add, or a permanent less cut to the budget, depending on how you reference it. Meaning that if we find the 700,000 this year, we have to find it next year and the year after and the year after, along with the percentage above it every year after that. So this is not something like the elementary school asking for a one-time $500,000 outlay because they need to get from one school year to another before their budget gets cut, because they will have savings in utilities, say in FY26 when a new elementary school opens or something like that, and savings in utilities and potentially staffing and all because of the combination of schools. We're not looking at like a one-time bridge type funding here. From their comments, it appears to me that this is a permanent funding request well above where we thought we could could fund next year. And so that to me says we can't fund it or even consider funding it out of reserves, because it's not logical to fund ongoing operating expenses out of reserves. It's not sustainable, as we heard the superintendent actually say last night when he indicated that they've moved some stuff into revolving funds, and our Counselor Griesemer asked, well, is that sustainable? And his answer said, no, that just delays some more cuts a couple years down the line, because you can't sustain it out of something that is spending more than comes in. And so in my mind, if we were going to fund the additional increase above the 4% guidelines, it has to come from the other three areas of the operating budget: the elementary schools, the general government, and the library. The library received an increase of, I don't know, $80,000 is their 4% increase or something this year. The entire increase among all four for operating budgets was $2.9 million. And right now the schools with this additional 700 requests are asking for 2.43 million of the $2.9 million of the increase to our budget, our operating budgets as a whole, leaving, $400,000, less than $500,000 for all other salaries at the general government and library and all. I want to know what that cut to general government looks like, or what the cuts that would need to be made to the elementary, the library, and the general government budgets below that 4% financial guidelines would look like in order to shift the 700,000 from those three budget increases to the regional school budget. How severe is it? As Andy pointed out last night, it's the entire Crest Department plus. I'm also worried, is any reduction in, say, public safety, where we've had a lot of requests over the last couple of years to reduce, mean we're not a 24/7 system anymore, just like Andy? I think we're operating right about where we couldn't be 24/7 anymore. What do those cuts in specifics look like? I want to know what the plan is going forward. The council's been asking the regional school committee in particular for plans for the last 3 or 4 years, knowing hard choices were coming. It doesn't appear from my vantage point as a counselor that plans were made. They seem to be 1-year reactions, including what the superintendent said last night about reallocating to revolving funds or ESSER funds. Well, ESSER disappears next year completely. What's the plan for where that $500,000 loss is coming from? What cuts are being planned for that? Or are they just going to ask the towns for another $500,000 to make up for the ESSER funds? What's the plan for when the revolving funds can't sustain the more outlay than income that's coming in 2 or 3 years, as the superintendent said they were? Where's the plan for all of that? It's clearly some sort of structural thing that I will say is also created by some state stuff, but I'd like to see a plan, or at least some thought of what could be done in the next 3, 4, 5 years, or what needs to be done for it. I'm curious what the E&D balance at the region is right now. A couple years ago, the region had to return money to the towns because the E&D balance exceeded 5%. It seems like that money probably should have been used for some operating funds to make sure it stays under 5% as we look things now. So how close are we to 5%? I would hate to be having to cut stuff because we can't fund it out of operating, and then halfway through the years see that the region's handing back $500,000 to the towns because E&D was exceeded by 5%. So I'm curious what the plan, where that stands right now. Those are some of my more immediate questions and answers that I'd like.
Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just process really. Are you relying on me to be writing down all these questions and taking them back, or will you develop a list yourself to convey to Doug or the committee? Just
We'll develop a list.
okay, okay, thank you. Because I wasn't writing fast
No,
enough.
no, it's not
All
your,
right, thank you.
it's not your responsibility.
Okay.
Councilor Walker?
Thank you. I just have a couple of things. I think Mandy had a lot of really good questions. I just wanted to make one comment in that, like, yes, I would also like to see like what planning has been happening at the school committee and regional school committee level. However, also just want to acknowledge that turnover, just in terms of how our government is set up, makes that really difficult because half of the people we're asking this question to were not even on the school committee last year. And also our situation with the superintendent. So I just want to acknowledge that that definitely adds some difficulty to what's happening here. And then I also wanted some confirmation as to whether or not our police department is actually functioning at the minimum, because I think I heard Mandy say that and maybe caught the end of Andy saying that, but I never heard that that was the case. So I'm wondering if we can get more information as to what that, like what our current state is actually there with the police department and other safety services. Like, are they actually operating at their minimum right now?
Kathy?
Okay, I won't repeat, and Sarah, yeah, I'll send these questions also, and so Bob can compile them. When I look at the way the budgets are presented, they're always presented first as current services, mean more or less it means everyone who's currently working is still on staff. I would, and I'll send in specifics. I'd like to see enrollment trends and staffing trends over the last, I went back and looked at DESE data. I don't know whether it's 10 years, every 5 years. I'll just look at it a little bit more, but I'd like it to come from you all, so I'm not doing numbers. So enrollment and staffing, because I think some of what is happening is because of COVID, adjustments in staffing didn't follow changes in enrollment the way it might have. And if any case, it might have gone in a different direction. And I did pull out the disabilities data on trying to figure out whether disability number of kids as DESE measures them has gone up or not. And depending on what year I look at, the answer is yes. But it's sometimes been as high as we now are and sometimes been lower. So, is there a blipping up and down? Because I know that what that would mean is more of the staff was related to disabilities, but it doesn't necessarily mean we need more staff. If the number of children didn't go up, if it's just the proportion. So I was looking actually at numbers, like for example, we're below where we were a decade ago in absolute numbers of children as DESE counts them. So I'll send some in on that. And I think Mandy's question about the school's equivalent of the reserve fund, where is the money that is not being spent and what's been budgeted in the next year in terms of, is there a good chance that it'll be on the high side? My last comment is one I've kept making. The point that both Bob and Andy made about our property taxes are not increasing at a rate of cost of living or of what we're paying our staff, and this is true across the way. And it's a fixed tax. The tax that is increasing is the income tax, the state income tax. And the place we get the income tax is Chapter 70, and the place we lose the income tax is the charter, the way the charter formula works. And then the other place we haven't seen what we thought would be a flow of funds into K through 12 is the millionaire's tax. And when you look at the distribution of what the governor did with that, there is a K through 12 line, but a lot of it was capital, and there was nothing I have no problem with that because some of what it did is funded more money from MSBA to build our school. But in the meantime, the legislature is looking at offsetting student debt and other things, all drawing on that same base. And I think we need to unite with other towns. So aside from this call for us doing internal planning that goes more than 1 year, these are cross-cutting, South Hadley, Northampton, Amherst, and then even a few Boston schools got hit by the Student Opportunity Act formula, are facing steep layoffs as they lose their ESSER money. So I would like to see to what extent we're starting to build a group. And the libraries around the state did that to get more money for the library funding. The schools did that to get more money out of MSBA. I think we need to do something that organizes around charter formula. So I know that is not a fix for this year. So my last question is, if there were more money from some source from Amherst, and it was not 700,000, but it was 200 or 300,000. If we name a couple things, what could be done with that amount of money? And do we think the other towns would be coming up with an equivalent share? Knowing everything what Mandy said is true, that this would be not solving the problem. It would just be giving a safety net for someone to figure out how the following year one solves the problem. And so I will be raising the question of, did we go too high on the capital allocation when we went to 10.5? We knew it would be a squeeze on the operating budget. Both Bob and Sarah are on JCPC, and right now there are more asks than the money we have, but there a few could be either not done at all or moved to a different year. And if we freed up some capital money and designated it for the regional school, might that be possible, but contingent on a plan for the following year, because the next years on capital keeps looking worse, including Crocker needs some major capital expenditures, and we didn't have big school. So I'll put that in writing on if there is some but not all of what you asked for, what could be done with that money in a much lower tranche than 700,000. So those are going to be my questions, starting with enrollment data. And I just want to say, Sarah, when I send that through to Doug, in the past, we've been told you can go find it on DESE. I think it's much healthier to have the schools just send us a table and say, this is the DESE table, but this is the numbers we send to DESE, and we also believe these numbers are accurate. It just somehow better than Kathy going and downloading data from a table.
Well, it's not even easy. It's
not easy. I do know how to do it.
The administration should provide that. I support that.
Okay. And charter, I can get the charter. And I've also been looking, just so people know, I've said this before, but our share of kids who are disabled by DESE numbers is around 24%, as Doug said. Chinese immersion is 11%. And so we're sending an average amount we spend to the school, but they are not serving the same kinds of children. And Amherst gives them a healthy profit margin compared to other sending schools in the immediate area. And they're expanding and renting new places because they've actually been making money. So it's just another way of saying there's something wrong with the formula. And it's a lot of money that's coming out of the regional school system. So that's it.
I just want to add that special education is not well done in charter schools, and they cut. My wife is a clinical psychologist, has done a lot of consulting with schools and IEPs, and they don't really provide much at most of the charter schools. So.
And Bob, when you get the DESE number that's 11 versus a 24, it doesn't say what are those children?
Yeah.
Are they are some behavioral problem kids, or are they the kids on inhalers in wheelchairs with, severely on the severe end rather than more, yeah. So
Yes. Anyway, Councilor Walker?
Thank you. Just two other quick things. So one, I'm not extremely familiar with how free cash works, but I'm wondering if that's something we can look at, like if there's a pattern to where our free cash is coming from each year, or if it's generally just different places, because I think if we're identifying like consistently we're having free cash coming from this place, like maybe that's a place we can look at moving funds from. And then my other, just wanted to acknowledge that we have a hand in the audience who is also a school committee member, a regional school committee member, and seeing if we might be able to bring them in.
Got two, actually. Jennifer and Deb.
Sure. Do you want to bring them in, Athena?
This isn't a regional school committee meeting, so I'm not sure that would be appropriate.
No.
And I think you
Are you
would end
taking
up
public?
with a quorum of the
I don't want to bring in a
Amherst School Committee, and
Well, this is not, you're not talking about Amherst school budget, just the regional budget, and that quorum is 5. So I think we'd be okay.
Well,
I mean,
I
I'm
was
not
just
sure why I was
wondering, 'cause
invited.
that was going to be my question. I just assumed because Sarah was here that it might be appropriate because they're all equal parts of the regional school committee and it wouldn't be a quorum.
Right. Or I'm happy to get stuck in the, attendees.
I think if you're advising against that, then let's just leave them in the audience. I see there's hands up in the audience. I do want I'll open up public comment again, but we just remember we cannot respond to public comment. So if you do want to make a public comment, I will call on you shortly, but we've got some counselors here who I need to hear from first. Thank you. Andy?
well, a couple things. One is that Alicia made Councilor Walker made a comment earlier that is worth following up on, because she was asking a question about confirmation of the whether or not the police department is at minimum funding to provide 24/7 service. And my understanding is that because we've asked this question in prior years, that there's only 2 police officers on patrol at any time, plus a backup sergeant available at most of that time, and that if there's any kind of a situation that causes severe concern and they need 2 officers, they've taken everybody who's available. But I think that it is worth having a presentation, and I would suggest, Bob, that you or Athena talk to Paul about who he would want to come and make that presentation. It is sort of an awkward time because the acting chief is also interviewing today for the permanent chief position along with one other candidate. So we're in a somewhat of an awkward time, as is the school, when you ask about our next superintendent, sort of in the same place. But the other thing that I wanted to follow up on is Kathy's what Kathy was saying about the state funding, because I have been working that issue from the MMA side for the past several years, and have been spending a lot of time at it, and talking to our senator and representative about the issue. I've been talking with the mayor of Northampton and others who have been referenced in this to understand what's going on with their budgets and their schools and why they're in the crisis that they're in, and comparing it to our experience here. there's no question, and you know, Slaughter brought it up last night, that the Student Opportunity Act is taking so much Chapter 70 funding over the implementation period that it has created this minimum funding dilemma. And if you look at the Student Opportunity Act, it actually comes up with the $30 figure. The $30 figure isn't made up by the governor entirely, because the Student Opportunity Act assumes that $30 is the minimum funding. And so every time that the legislature agrees to an appropriation that's greater than $30, whether it be usually the last 2 years, they've doubled it to $60. They've in effect, appropriated additional funds so that they could do the Student Opportunity Act, which is taking the lion's share of the increase. So there's no way to avoid that. And of course, the fact that we have falling enrollment then takes away from whatever the $30 or $60 has been, because it's based on enrollment, and it has that additional effect to it. And as far as fair share, I have had that conversation with legislators, and I've gotten an awful lot of pushback, but I've made the argument because it's so obvious that I've also been somewhat interested in the fact that the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which represents our teachers, but also represents faculty at community colleges and the university, seems to be in a conflicted position as far as I can tell, because they're asking for money for the community colleges, and community colleges have done much better out of the fair share than have K-12 schools, and how they're dealing with that conflict question. So these are difficult times with difficult issues that, and I think we do need to do the best we can, but I don't want to build on a happy assumption that we're going to solve the problem in a year.
Thanks. Councilor Haneke?
Yeah. A couple other things that come to mind, along with Kathy's request for data, it might have been, what I'm going to say might have been sort of included in that, but staffing numbers split by the payroll lines in the budget that we get. So it doesn't have to be staffing for math department versus this, but the general education, the special education, the administration, the support staff, you name it, things like that. Staffing numbers at those 5-year intervals, maybe for the last 20 years or so. Comparing that to enrollment numbers. Comparisons of budgets, staffing, and enrollments for schools with similar sized 7 to 12 enrollments. I was reading an article recently, and Hadley's per pupil costs are $18,000. Our regions are $24,000. At our elementary school was $28,000 per pupil cost. We always seem to be an outlier, and all we get when we ask why are we an outlier is we spend more on SPED, but I'm not so sure we do. Not so sure we do as compared to the percentage we're spending on SPED versus the percentage we're spending on Gen Ed within any district, and so I'd like some comparisons to other districts and their spending numbers when our administration says, well, it's because we have more sped enrollments and we spend disproportionately more for that, or whatever it is. I think we need to drill down a little bit more as to why we are so much higher on a per pupil basis than many schools that have similar enrollment numbers to us, you know, in those grades. I'd like to know, you know, overrides potentially have been mentioned. I don't know whether it will continue to be mentioned, but one thing I'd like to know is things like if Amherst were to find the money and the other three towns weren't, and so our percent, what we were passed on a budget or gifted to the schools was more than the 4%, but everyone else did 4% and we found a way to do 6% or something. How does that translate to other obligations for Amherst as compared to the region? I mentioned E&D excess of 5% gets returned to the towns. Well, if we're contributing in a budget year more than the statutory formula, then then the statutory formula says, and E&D happens to come back, do we just get the statutory formula back? Or do we get the percentage we contributed the year as compared to the rest of the assessments? Like, how does, if we become more generous than other towns to our regional budget, how does that affect other things that happen in the region as it relates to four towns' obligations, or refunds to four towns or things like that? Because I wouldn't want to see, and maybe we'll never see an E&D payback again, but I wouldn't want to see if the statutory assessment method has Amherst paying 80% of the assessment and suddenly we're paying 85%, and then E&D comes back and we only get 80%. We basically just gave 5% to three other towns. And that does not seem right from my fiduciary duty to Amherst's taxpayers. So I'd like to know some stuff like that. And I'll try and come up with a way to ask those questions in a more logical manner. But I'm just trying to look forward of, in the end, we already with the guardrails sort of had a skewed assessment method to begin with that wasn't straight out of statutory. And I'm worried that if it gets even more skewed, how does that obligate Amherst's taxpayers as compared to the other three towns' taxpayers, given other budget constrictions? Are we in some sense subsidizing Pelham, Shutesbury, and Leverett's DPW or their capital projects to the detriment of Amherst's capital projects or DPW or public safety?
Thank you. Kathy?
This comment is less for the school folks. And by the way, if we look at past precedent on bringing people in, when we were dealing reparations, we brought the whole committee in. So there has, when we're just having a discussion rather than voting. So I don't really see a problem with bringing the other two school committee members in, but I do think we should be hearing also from the administration on all of these questions we're asking, because most of these questions can't be answered directly by the school committee. I just want to put on the table one other place. Alicia wanted to know about free cash and where its origins were. The one we've put in our guidelines that is money is the cannabis money. And we've so far said each year in the fall, we'll put that into reparations. That's a discretionary allocation of that. And those funds were never allocated before. So if, in Mandy's question, if we came up with some money, how would it work with all the funding formulas? My question is, there may be some different ways we could come up with some money if the finance committee thought it made sense. So I'm just going to put one more on the table. It's not Andy's, if we went from $30 to $100, which is what MMA has been proposing on chapter 70, Lynn's right in saying last night that gets you about $80,000 or 84. It doesn't, it's not a big chunk of money. We need a change in that formula. There's something wrong with these formulas. People are not looking at them before they put them in. And then we're learning about the consequences. So I don't know who's doing the modeling before and after, but there's a large flaw. And some of these show up so quickly, you ought to have been able to anticipate the flaw rather than see it 20 years later. So it's just something I would like us as the Finance Committee to be talking about, if we're talking about money at all, conditions and answers to these questions. And that's it.
Okay, I see that Athena has departed. I'm a co-host, but I don't know how to bring somebody in. Mandy,
I know how to do it.
okay.
Do you want to allow Deb and Jennifer to talk?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see. I'm ICOS. I'm not.
No, I am, so I can do that.
Okay. Thanks, Mandy.
great.
I'm not. All right.
Sorry.
So I've just allowed both Jennifer and Deborah, but you'll have to recognize them so they know who's up.
Okay, Jennifer?
Hi, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So I see that you have Sarah Marshall in the meeting as a panelist, and Sarah is chair of the Amherst School Committee. But as you've said, this is not an issue with the Amherst Elementary Schools. This is a regional school issue. And Ms. Marshall herself has said that when it comes to the regional school committee, she's just another member like the rest of us. So I hope you'll allow me a little leeway and not cut me off after 3 minutes, which it didn't sound like you were going to do. So I have a few responses to some of the things I've heard today, and I have some ideas as well. First, Councillor Steinberg said earlier something to the effect of like, what is to be gained by delaying the inevitable? Like if we need to make this cut this year, if we don't make it this year and we'll need to make it next year, what's the point of, or what's to be gained by delaying? And my answer is there's a lot to be gained. There is a lot to be gained by however way you can fund it this year, even if it turns out that next year we're going to have to make the cuts. What's to be gained is another year of middle school students who will be able to complete a full year of high school language in middle school. And what is to be gained is another year of a restorative justice coordinator who's helping students with issues, overcome those issues. So there's a lot to be gained by delaying it for 1 year. There was a question last night, and it's come up again today. Sorry, I'm moving on to a new topic about whether this additional funding would get added to the base. And I feel, and I think the superintendent answered, but I'm going to push back a little on the answer. And I think this is not a clear topic. And the fact that town councilors are asking the question means that I don't think it's a clear topic. It's not, I don't think it's the district's job to tell you whether it's added to the base or not. I feel like that's the town council's decision and purview to decide if you're going to add it to the base or not. Because come next year, if let's say, a miracle happens and state funding goes up a whole lot and the town doesn't have to give as much. I mean, I know it's wishful thinking, but then you wouldn't just give it the $700,000 again next year because you gave it this year. It just next year is going to be next year, and so I don't know that that's necessarily an answered question as to whether this gets added to the base or not. And in fact, when I first this idea of approving a larger budget than the guidance given by the towns, this was originally brought forth as like what if the towns could just give a one-time gift for this year and to bridge us to next year. And I know Manji Joe mentioned that this isn't a bridge situation, but I think it is because, well, first of all, this year that we're talking about, fiscal 25, is the last year we're going to have ESSER funds. So we do have ESSER funds this year. Next year is going to be even harder than this year. So I see this year as a bridge to next year's fiscal cliff, or however you want to call it, is going to be even worse. And so my thought originally was we need to figure out what we're going to do for next year. And my original idea was crazy idea was to do a Proposition 2.5 override to get us settled for fiscal 25, and then for fiscal 26, put together a multifaceted effort, however that looks, to do a Proposition 2.5 override. And we don't even have to think that it's going to pass or know if it's going to pass. We just We just have to try. So whether you think it would pass or not is irrelevant right now. We would have to try. So when it comes to a plan for the future, my plan is going to be to suggest that the regional school committee put together a revenue subcommittee, to think about what can we do to raise more revenue for next year? Is it talking to Amherst College? And we already have a subcommittee dedicated to that. Is it UMass? Is it a Proposition 2.5 override? Is it advocating for more state funding? Is it the Fair Share Amendment funds? Like once we hire a superintendent, that's all I can think about right now. But once that's over, which it should be soon, I'm going to focus on what are the sources of revenue that we can push for so that we can climb out of this hole for fiscal 26. So I think that's all I wanted to say in terms of responding to some of the things I've heard. Oh, I'm sorry, just one last thing. The question was, what have we been doing for the past few years to plan for this? And I guess my answer is, we haven't done a lot. We haven't been proactive. But as I said, this year, this fiscal year we're talking about, we have ESSER funds, and we didn't know that despite those ESSER funds, we'd still have this big, large shortfall. We didn't know that until this year. And so I guess for me, I wasn't thinking that this would be the terrible year. I was thinking next year would be. And I think next year is going to be pretty terrible, but I didn't anticipate that we'd have such a big budget shortfall for this year. Also, honestly, the school committee's been in a little bit of crisis mode, a little bit of survival mode for the last year. And we've been doing basic things like appointing a superintendent and like filling vacancies. Like I'm sorry, we've been in survival mode, so we haven't been able to do the proactive things that we need to do. But for me, once the new superintendent is at least identified and hired, I'm going to shift my attention to how can we raise revenue and how can we address this budget crisis. Thank you.
Jennifer, let me just respond to your issue about revenue. And I encourage you to talk to Amherst College and to UMass. However, there is another way that we could use those resources, and that is to have more kids, more students attend classes at either place. My son, for example, took an advanced math course at UMass when he was in high school and got college credit for it. So that would be very beneficial, but it's not, dollars exchanging hands, so to speak. So just bear that in mind as well, as one of the ways that we can ask for help is to increase the number of students that have opportunities to attend classes at those institutions.
And
Okay, thanks for that idea.
Bob, I would add UMass and Amherst because our kids did chemistry, physics, and math at the 3 different places. I mean, they use them instead of AP, they just went on and took a college level course. Yeah.
Right. Deborah, did you want to say anything?
Sure. Hi, I guess that's my personal profile. I guess I'm logged on as D. Lee Leonard. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually did speak to Sarah Beth Kenny about being available to answer questions for the region since she wasn't unable to attend. So I'm blending roles a little bit. I don't really have a general statement to make on behalf of the region. I do have my own personal observations, sort of in the lines of what Jennifer spoke to, that there is something to be gained. And we don't know if we're going to be facing this situation again in a year's time, but the tone has changed with the APEA. And I think that's beneficial. One of the things that came up during campaigning is, how are you going to build trust? How are you going to repair relationships? And it's advocacy. It gives us a year to advocate at the state level, at the local level. It gives us a year to do some analysis. And I have to say that, yes, we've been in survival mode, but if you look at the budget book and you try to generalize, we get columns. There's fiscal year 2024, fiscal year 2023, both of which had ESSER funds. I don't even know when ESSER began. Is it a 3-year program or what? But, there's
those budget lines from fiscal year 24, 23, 22, and 21 are impossible to interpret because of COVID and because of we're still emerging, as Superintendent Slaughter said, there are still needs that are being met. Trauma doesn't magically go away. So students experience trauma during those years, and some of those issues are still being addressed. And I have to say, I don't know about other schools, but I do know that guidance is hopping. Every person is very, very busy there. So one of my concerns in looking at the budget with the $1.6 million cuts is if we're taking a caseload of 210 per guidance counselor up to 240, where the maximum limit recommended by the School Counselors Association is 250, where does that leave us? If we're really focused on, as the state expects us to be, making students able to pass the ELA, the math and the science, MCAS, regardless of in order to achieve a high school diploma, where does that come out of the needs of our students? The proposed cuts for 2 special ed teachers, we have very low enrollment in certain biology classes for good reason. ELL learners, as well as students with special needs, need to pass the same level of MCAS with some exceptions in order to get a high school diploma. So there's places in which I don't know how to, and I will go back and look at numbers and do comparisons, but there's places in which we're doing the best to meet our needs, and what that looks like a year from now, I don't know. But I do know that regardless of the status of the budget and the lines that we're looking at, I don't have the data that to make decisions, informed decisions about the budget right now. I pulled up this best practices sheet by the MASC, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, and I was humbled by the ways in which our district has not been able to report on the cost-effective resource management of our programs. And we owe it to our taxpayers, we owe it to our students, we owe it to our towns to be able to look at these programs from a proactive way. All we right now have is anecdotal evidence. We have very strong opinions in the public about what's essential and no other data to balance that out. So we have nothing to gauge our decision making on besides what we hear from individuals. So I would love a year of advocacy, but I would love a year of analysis. I would love to see what resources are available to us, if not in terms of checks, in terms of perhaps our partners in the town helping us make these decisions. Our communications is lacking. We got this amazing grant from MIT, and it's lost in the noise of the gray of our website, and we get into this cycle of only the news that people hear is bad news. We have amazing teachers doing phenomenal things, innovative programs, and yes, we're in competition, but yes, we're still really, really, really strong. And to build that confidence and build that trust, it is a process. And I recognize, and we all recognize, that we were looking at our mission statement and we were looking at this budget and we couldn't align the two. So we chose to align what we asked for with our mission, with the understanding that perhaps that couldn't be supported and we would have to have those hard conversations with our community, but it would take a year. It would take time to say, I'm sorry, we can't provide this. And maybe the community does want to support, or the communities do want to support a 2.5 override, or maybe they don't. Maybe they want to be, they would have to be part of the process in which we look at how our existing financial constraints can match what we say we provide for our students. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Counselor Haneke?
Thank you. I guess some of the information that I know cannot be provided now or even in the next couple of weeks, but in response to some of the statements that were just made, it sounds like some on the school committee are asking for funding for this year to really be able to do planning on budget stuff next year, but there might be a disagreement as to what that planning is. Ms. Shao talked about revenue subcommittee of looking only at revenues. Ms. Leonard talked about analyzing expenditures and other things and maybe curriculum stuff too. I think given that multiple towns have been asking for strategies and plans for multiple years, not just this last year, I think I would need a concrete plan for what the school committee would be doing and would be producing, and not just on a revenue advocacy side. At least many of us on the town council know how hard that is, and that it many times takes multiple years and is sometimes successful and sometimes not. A hope for changing the fair share allotment by a governor or upping Chapter 70 funds is just that, a hope, no matter how much we do sometimes. And we need to keep doing that advocacy, but it's on its own is not a plan for staving off the multiple fiscal cliffs that we're seeing. I think we need that analysis, but I would need to be confident that in a year that would happen and there would be a multi-year plan that is doable. Similarly, going back to kind of where my ramble was before, if there were a 2.5 override, what happens if only one town passes it? Or 2 towns pass overrides? Again, how does that work with formulas and assessments and let me say, fairly sharing the burden of a 4-town regional school system amongst the 4 towns? I'd like to hear a little bit more about things like that too. And not all of this can be answered now, or even before we have to vote a budget. But that's some of the questions that go through my head as a town councilor.
Thank you. Jennifer, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you. Let's see. I wanted to react or respond to some of the things that my colleague Ms. Leonard said. First, that I thought she said she didn't know enough about the budget or wasn't prepared. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was about not knowing things and only knowing things because individuals have told us. But I think that the outpouring of support for example, for the World Languages Program and the Restorative Justice Program, like that tells me what I need to know about the value of those 2 programs. It may be individuals who were sharing with us, but I think there was enough of a mass outpouring of support for those programs to tell me that those 2 programs work. So and in addition, this idea that communication in the district is lacking, and I won't argue with that. But we've heard from, for example, from Debbie Westmoreland, who's the director of communications, that the central office staff is stretched really thin. Like, it's even hard to get updates to the website because they're stretched so thin, and we're cutting or we're the proposed budget has a cut of 2.0 FTEs in the central office. So like we're making sacrifices, and those are resulting in some things not being as ideally communicated as we want them to be. But I think everyone's doing the best they can. As for Mandy Jo's questions, I mean, those are all great questions. And I'm glad you said at the end that some of them are going to be unknown before you have to vote on this budget. I think this is all very complex. And I know I don't have to tell you as the finance committee that it's okay that things are complex and we should embrace the complexity and work with it. And there are going to be things that we don't know. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Like we should, if we think if we do get a revenue subcommittee or if people decide to do a Proposition 2.5 override and we don't know if it's going to pass, and then we don't know what the outcome will be if one town passes and the others don't, that's not a reason not to try. We still have to try and do the best that we can to support our schools and our students. Yeah, I'll be working on a multi-year plan. I don't know that I'm going to get you anything before you guys need to vote on the budget, but you have at least my word that once the superintendent search is final, I'll be working on a multi-year plan. And the fact that different school committee members have different areas, different ideas and areas of focus, that's okay too. Like it's a democracy and we're individuals. And I think together as a school committee, we're going to have to come up with both a spending plan and a revenue plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have anything? Okay, well, we'll if you can send your comments or questions to me, I will compile them and then send them on to through Athena to Doug Slaughter.
Excuse me, Bob, I'm sorry. Could I ask you one more question? Could you clarify, like, what are the next steps in terms of timing? Like what happens now?
Okay, you probably missed the earlier part, but we are going to review the regional school budget in greater detail at our next meeting, which is April 16th. And then on Thursday, April 25th at 6:30 p.m., there'll be a public hearing. And after that, the Finance Committee will continue on and come up with a recommendation to the council. And then the council will vote sometime after that. We don't know when we can get it on the council agenda.
Thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, I think that what Athena said and what I've heard from the council president is that the thought is to do it on April 29th at the council meeting to have the actual vote, which would put us after two of the smaller town meetings, but before the last of the town meetings. I think that Shutesbury is last and that Pelham and Leverett are the Saturday before that Monday. The other thing I was going to respond to that had been brought up earlier is that there was a lot of questions about how the Chapter 70 formula works and why it was designed the way it was. And there was a MMA presentation that was made that was extremely complex. I actually had this discussion with another counselor who attended it. There are actually a couple of spreadsheets that are available. Desi has a spreadsheet that I can forward to anyone who's interested that is a little bit simpler to understand than the presentation. But I thought that the presentation was good in that the finance officer from the Worcester schools really did explain what the goals were and why it was constructed. And that's, I thought that he did a very good job of talking about how you look at town's ability to pay and how that factors in looking at both the property in a town and the amount of income that's available in the town, and that those are key factors that work into the formula that because it is built on both establishing a foundation budget, what is a basic budget, what percentage of the basic budget should come from the state, and then the town would be responsible for what was going to be above that amount, and the amount would be varies by community based upon those factors of property value and income available to the town, so that the very rich suburbs have get less in the way of state aid, and that's but you have to sort of understand that there are those principles that work in favor, and then anything above the foundation budget is a decision of the local community and is a local community share. And Amherst has historically had a budget that's substantially greater, both for the region and for the elementary schools, above the foundation budget, because we believe that in education, I think that we have a long history of believing in education. But you know, what we're finding is that we as a community have to come to grips with what the limits are, and you know, an override is possible, but you know, we just did a debt exclusion in order to build an elementary school, and I think that a lot of people are going to be looking at what they can afford at this point, having made that decision to build the elementary school. So I'm not sure how it would work out if we did make the ask, and it's a political decision that the council will have to make as to whether it wants to make an ask. And I think that the other thing that I just thought about as some of the comments were coming in early on, there was a discussion about some of the cost savings that could come on the elementary level, but I think that the way we are structured, we have to keep the two separate, so that if we save money because we built a new elementary school, you know, how does that, we have to come to grips with then the question, do those savings get used in the elementary school level, or do they get used in the shared with the other towns and used on the regional level? That's going to be a tough conversation to have when it comes about, because I think the school committee members have to grapple with the fact that they have dual responsibilities as chairs of two different school committees, and are they going to have to make that decision? Which gets me to my concluding comment, and that is that I think that we as a community have tried several times over the years to try and encourage our neighboring communities to join us in creating a K-12 school system, because K-12 school systems have more flexibility than what we have. There's costs that come from having two separate districts for two separate levels of K-12 education, two parts of K-12 education, and we lose the flexibility and incur the costs. And the other towns have, in the end, not always been supportive, at least have been sufficiently unsupportive to block it from happening on several different attempts, because you know, they're afraid of a decision being made to close their elementary school, or a decision made to move 6th grade students to the middle school, which would they think destroy something that they think is important in their communities. And so it's there's a lot of history here. And as this person who is chair of the last committee, that was the last attempt to work as a 4-town committee and see if we could solve the problem. I can tell you we poured a lot of time for about 1.5 years into that process to end up going nowhere because one town just couldn't abide by the result because they didn't want to put their school at risk. So that's sort of my concluding comments, that there's a lot of history here, a lot of complexity, and we have to live with the history and figure out a path forward. And I'm not sure that Amherst can do it alone. I think we have to do it with our regional partners, and we have to rely on the state too.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, the last thing we want to, well, I don't think we have any minutes. I certainly haven't seen them, so we're not going to get a chance to review the minutes. And I didn't get them from Athena. The last thing that I have on the agenda is the town budget review process discussion. So, okay, I was going to suggest that other folks leave. So last time we had a very good discussion. I thought we had talked about, I know Mandy had suggested that we look at whether or not the budget matches the guidelines. And I thought that was a good idea. I also thought we toyed with the idea of bringing in not everyone necessarily, but the bigger pieces of the budget to ask questions. And I know we talked about the school budget a lot as being the biggest one that we should be looking at. So it seems like we're going to be looking at the school budget in pretty good detail before we get to May. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions about how we kind of go forward. I mean, I think, the question is, do we really want to, do we want to focus in on whether or not budget meets the guidelines, or do we want to, also ask specific questions about specific, budgets by the people, bring in the head of the police chief and all that. So anyone, any thoughts? Councilor Haneke.
This is not well thought out right now, but I'm sort of going to be thinking out loud. What about if we start sort of with a focus on, does it meet the guidelines? And then, right now it's sort of all theoretical. We don't know what kind of budget's coming in. We don't know whether Paul's going to propose a lot of cuts because the personnel costs and everything rise more than, that 4% can hold too, right? We don't know. And so why, I feel like maybe first focusing on, does it meet the guidelines, and then seeing what the budget is, and from there potentially going to, are there any particular departments that are overly affected by the budget one way or another that we need to specifically discuss, sort of then focus maybe department invitations to, if there's an outlier, or if, say the budget comes in with big cuts to X department, I'm just going to pick recreation, well, maybe we need recreation in to see, to explore that a little bit further than maybe we would normally need to talk to recreation or something. Again, it's not a really well thought out comment because I'm just thinking about it now.
Yeah, I see where you're going. Unfortunately, I think if recreation is cut we can either just reject the entire budget or cut it more. So I don't think we have a lot of choice when it comes to the budget itself. So anyway, Kathy?
I like Mandy's idea of starting with, it's basically the whole book is
Yeah.
what she's suggesting, and where we have, I mean, it puts more burden on us because we can't read just a chapter ahead. If you knowing police is next week, or, we can get to enterprise funds later, but, trying to look big picture down. I do think we should get the safety group in together. And with enough lead time, at least enough lead time that we can focus on answers to questions rather than pure presentations, so that we get the budget book and then we can send out very focused questions. The enterprise funds as a set, several years ago, we had a surprise, and I'm hoping that will never happen again. But after we reviewed the whole budget, we thought we understood what was going on. In the middle of June, we found out about an $11 million expenditure that we hadn't been told about, that turned out to be an $18 million expenditure. So, just making sure we do that with an understanding. I mean, and that we've always done as a set. Library, I don't feel like needs as much time as we've devoted to it. And so I would rather get the library budget and then just send questions and get them answered in writing, than have that. We usually get a slideshow and a bunch of other things. And just one thing I've heard is that there's a shortfall in the Friends of the Library, Friends of Jones money, but I don't know how much. They've already figured out how to adjust that because they're going to be quasi-closed for a year. I mean, they'll have some kind of operation. So I think my questions are going to be more about how are they planning to operate during the time they're not downtown. So I would cut down on the number of total meetings, and I'm forgetting something. I mean, Mandy mentioned recreation, but I think we've got the little ones, the recreation. We have the one person sustainability department. We have planning, and we have the Rob Moore plus Chris Brestruff plus Dave Zomack. It's sort of a cluster, and recreation. I know the only hesitancy you're hearing from me is, to some extent, these are the times that people we don't hear from very often get to talk about their beloved departments. But those of us who are on JCPC know that the time can expand to the amount of time allotted to it, even if there's not much, the projects are small, so I'm trying to think of how to be efficient, but not make anybody feel like we've stepped over them. I've only mentioned a few of the smaller departments, human resources, DEI, a few of them. I think we could just read the budget book and ask questions. So I don't know how many fewer meetings that gets us to. But the big ones, we need time. Elementary school, we're going to need some time to look at what they send us to be able to figure out what our questions are. Yeah.
I think if we set expectations that, that we won't necessarily bring everybody in, then people hopefully won't feel like they're being ignored. And then again, I think we need to talk to Paul about how we do this, but I think we should say we're going to re-engage in the fall with everyone, and make it more meaningful, make input more meaningful. So, but again, we have to coordinate that very closely with Paul because we don't want to step on his toes. So,
and I have a question that's not related to the budget per se, but the regional schools that we just came off of. We had allocated some money to them from ARPA funds, the town, Paul, for the sixth grade transition. And some of that was to redo bathrooms to get the rooms in order. And they said they're not ready to take it.
Right.
However, they have no money to do it if they don't take it. So I'm a little worried that how we open a school that is going to take two schools and put them in one under the assumption the sixth grade is moving up. And so I don't know who we put. Maybe that is outside the normal budget cycle, but the ARPA money would have to be obligated by the end of this year. But if it's something like redo, I've sent a note into Paul, but I'm just a little worried about sleeper issues we've got here, that in 2026, the new school opens its doors and the sixth grade is still planning on coming to the new school, and there's no classroom space for it, or the middle school says we can't take you yet because we haven't done the following things to it. So when Mandy says planning, this is a rather large issue that is a difficult one. And one school committee said maybe we should rethink it. And I said, oh no, you can't rethink it. I mean, they have to move. So whether they move in 2025 or at the same time the school opens, but that's one I just want to reopen at some point because it's part of the plan for the school. And that's one where Desi asked for it to be a school within a school with an administrative structure that made it more expensive. But our state rep, Mindy, said if we knew what we wanted and we wanted to counter it, there's a new head of Desi, and we could go in and say, we think it should work this way. So I'm just worried that with the lack of the turnover at the top, we're not closing some of the doors on issues that will come back to us as the council. Do we have to keep Wildwood open because there's no place for the sixth graders to move? I mean, there are these things like I go, oh my gosh, we have to figure this out. So that may not have to be in May, but it feels like it has to be before the summer.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else?
So do you want us to send, if we're doing, Holly's still on, I see, or she's got her camera on. So I didn't get a chance to look at the assessor report on any level. So if I see anything, I have questions. Usually I don't have any questions because this kind of a report is, I shouldn't say it's easy for me to read, but I know what I want to look at. And I just zero in on what I want to look at. So we should send them through you, Bob, to go to Holly if we have specifics, or
Yeah, send them to me and I'll send them to Holly via Athena.
okay.
It's the simplest way. That way I'll have them all and we'll coordinate.
Okay, great.
Same thing with any questions on the school budget that you want to send on to Doug.
Okay, I'll try to write mine in ready to understand language rather than my stream of consciousness. And Mandy, I'll send it. You can trust me to do the years with the breakdown, like this FTE total and then regular and special. So just we can see the staffing changes or lack of change over time. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, is there Kathy, can you hang on after our meeting just for a second?
Sure. Sure. Do you need a motion to adjourn?
I need a motion to adjourn, yes.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Anyone second?
I'll second.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table. I'll just go through. Andy?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Kathy?
Yes.
Mandy, Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Councilor Walker?
Yes.
All right, I adjourn the meeting at 3:42 p.m. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Holly. Holly, is one of us, if she leaves, I think it's
Okay.
going to turn off.
Kathy, just very quickly.
Recording stopped.
Okay, recording.
On the JCPC, I have the I have a draft of the minutes, but I wanted to look at the tape before I, kind of sent them on to you. So is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. I just, I saw that Athena keeps putting review of minutes on our agenda, even though I said I'll review them so we don't have to. And I thought, well, I can't review them. That's perfect if you do a quick look on it. And I just sent a note out to everybody. Amherst Media is still on. I'm not sure why. To come prepared with thoughts, because this is the beginning of our discussion.
Right.
We might have to add another meeting, and I can't do it that extra Thursday. It would have to be end of April. So Sandy will have to tell us what leeway we have since we started so late.
Okay.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right,
Thanks
thanks.
for sharing. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.